Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Monday the 13th of March. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily updates from Ukraine on day 383 of the illegal Russian war of aggression and imperial ambition. Then I will introduce our guest for this evening, and then together we will discuss today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. The New York Times is reporting that the International Criminal Court intends to open 2 war crimes cases tied to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and will seek arrest warrants for several people. The cases are the first international charges to be brought forward since the start of the conflict. China's President Xi Jinping is planning to visit Russia as soon as next week, according to Reuters, and the Wall Street Journal is reporting that Xi is also planning to speak with President Zelensky for the first time since the start of the war. Negotiations between UN officials and Russia's deputy foreign minister on a possible extension to the deal allowing the safe export of grain from Ukraine's Black Sea ports have begun today. That's according to the Russian diplomatic mission in Geneva. Russian forces fired 2 rockets at a school in Avdiivka, according to the head of the office of the Ukrainian presidency, Andriy Yermak. President Volodymyr Zelensky has awarded the Hero of Ukraine to Alexander Matsievsky, the soldier who was executed by machine gun fire on camera after being captured by Russian soldiers. Suspilny, Ukraine's state broadcaster, is reporting a claim that resistance fighters have blown up a railway that Russian forces were using in occupied Kherson. Russia's industry minister said earlier today it was expanding its list of brands that can be imported without the trademark's owner's permission to include goods from companies such as IKEA and the US toy manufacturers Hasbro and Mattel. Patriarch Kirill of Moscow has offered congratulations to Pope Francis on the 10th anniversary of the latter's election. Relations between the Pope and the Patriarch have been strained since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Georgian Prime Minister, Irakli Garibashvili, has told Ukraine's political leadership to stay out of Georgian politics. His criticism comes after Ukrainian political leaders expressed their support for protesters in Tbilisi. The Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko has arrived in Iran for an official visit to meet local leaders and to discuss trade and economic cooperation. The Ukrainian Special Forces unit Kraken has destroyed 2 Russian observation towers in Bryansk in a drone attack. A 3rd tower was previously destroyed on the 5th of March. Ukraine and Russia both claimed that hundreds of enemy troops have been killed in the previous 24 hours in the ongoing fight for Bakhmut, with Kyiv fending off attacks and a small river that bisects the town now marking the new front line. Ukraine's military said it repelled more than 92 Russian assaults in 5 areas over the past day, and the Turkish Defence Minister, Hulusi Akar, said he believes that the deal allowing Ukrainian grain to be exported via the Black Sea will be extended from its deadline on the 18th of March. Now, we are lucky this evening to be joined by Ian Fraser. Ian was born in Edinburgh, is married with 3 children, and has a degree in English from St Andrews University. He has worked as a journalist for around 30 years, writing for titles including The Economist, The FT, Sunday Times, Guardian, Independent, Reuters, Dow Jones, The Daily Mail, The Herald, and The Sunday Herald. In his book, Shredded: Inside RBS, the Bank That Broke Britain, he explores the series of cataclysmic misjudgments, the toxic internal culture, and the light-touch regulatory regime that gave rise to RBS NatWest's near collapse. Ian, can you see me? Good evening. How are you keeping?
Very well, thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Scotland at 7 on Broadcasting Scotland this evening. Our first item this evening is that the ballot for SNP members to vote for a new party leader opened at 12 noon today, as the 3 leadership candidates have made their pitches on the SNP website. All three candidates have prepared a short statement to accompany ballot packs, and the SNP hopefuls have also recorded a short video for the SNP website. The three candidates have engaged in a nationwide campaign, taking part in 9 party hustings covering every Scottish parliamentary regional area, as well as televised debates and interviews. The campaigns and TV debates are continuing, and the ballot will remain open until 12 noon on Monday, the 27th of March. The result is expected to be announced the same day. The SNP's National Secretary Lorna Finn said, "The ballot for SNP members to vote for a new party leader is now open, and the 3 candidates to become SNP leader have made their pitch to SNP members on our website. On my instruction," she continued, "my voice is sending emails to all eligible party members this afternoon with a link that allows them to vote online, and anyone without a validated email address is automatically sent a paper ballot." Never has there been so much interest in a party leadership contest in Scotland, so I thank Kate, Ash and Humza for sharing their vision and plans and for all of their efforts so far. So, Ian, the leadership election campaign is in full swing, and the polling has opened this afternoon at midday and is open until midday on the 27th. Thinking generally about the leadership campaign for a moment, what has struck you most about the contest that we have all been watching?
Well, to be quite honest, I haven't actually been following it as closely as I would normally because I've been away on holiday in France for the whole of last week and with the family. So I haven't really got a full, you know, view necessarily of who's doing what well and who's doing badly. But overall, I would say I'm not really. I'm slightly underwhelmed by all 3 candidates. I think Ash Regan is promising things which she will not be able to deliver. I think Humza Yousaf seems to be possibly more promising, but there are aspects of his character and his integrity, which I do have doubts about. And the third candidate, Kate Forbes, some people admire the fact that she's been honest about her political views rather than hiding, sorry, not political, her religious stroke socially conservative views. Some people claim that it's a positive that she has actually been honest about these. But I think like with the former Lib Dem leader, what's his name again? Sorry, mental blank about the
Alec,
name.
Willie Rennie?
No, in the UK Lib Dem leader who had,
Tim Farron.
I think that basically that there's going to be irreconcilable problems between her hardline we free views on abortion and gay marriage, etc., and her ability to run a progressive nation such as Scotland. So overall, I'm not so wild about any of the candidates, but I think maybe Humza could be the best of the 3.
Okay. Thank you, Ian. And this afternoon, in a YouGov poll for Sky News, that poll found that people tend to think that all the candidates for First Minister would be worse than Nicola Sturgeon. Kate Forbes scores 16% net worse, Ash Regan 30% net worse, and Humza Yousaf 40% net worse. Now, notwithstanding that this is polling not of SNP members but of voters, more generally, but the polling finding that they don't the response is that these candidates would not will perform worse as First Minister than Nicola Sturgeon. That's not a particular surprise, is it? After all, these people responding to the poll have only ever seen Nicola Sturgeon as First Minister. They've not seen the other 3.
True. I think one of the things that she was exceptionally good at was quick fire responses to challenges in interviews and in Parliament in Holyrood. She was a superb political performer, Nicola Sturgeon. So I do think it will be hard for any of those 3 to perform quite as well as she did in a range of contexts. But you know, political performances, the ability to think on your feet in a debate is not necessarily the be all and end all of being a good leader.
I think that's very fair. It takes a little bit more than that to lead the country and to run the country. That's a very fair assessment. Thanks, Ian.
Yeah,
No doubt. Now you're back in Scotland. Now you're back here. Well, you'll be getting a little bit more information, and whether you like it or not, you'll be seeing a lot more of the leadership election campaign for the SNP. But we'll move on to our next item this evening, because the UK government has struck a last-minute deal for HSBC to buy Silicon Valley Bank's UK operations. That's saving thousands of British tech startups and investors from big losses after the largest bank failure since 2008. The takeover will override the Bank of England's initial decision to place SVB UK into insolvency. That's after a run on the lender that was originally sparked by fears over a multi-billion-pound shortfall in the US parent company's balance sheet. The US bank was closed and its assets seized by US authorities on Friday. The acquisition, which only cost HSBC £1, followed overnight talks between Downing Street, the Bank of England, and HSBC bosses, including their chief executive Noel Quinn, as authorities rushed to protect the finances of SVB UK's 3,500 customers. Those customers included venture capital investors and hundreds of tech startups that feared they would go bust if their deposits were wiped out. In response to the SVB collapse, economists have said that central banks could be forced to stop raising interest rates amid growing signs of financial stress linked to rapid increases in borrowing costs over the past year. Analysts said the US Federal Reserve would probably leave interest rates on hold at its decision next week as the meltdown at the California-based technology lender ripples through global financial markets. Against a backdrop of concern over contagion spreading through the wider global banking industry, financial market expectations for further significant rate increases from the Bank of England and the European Central Bank also eased today. So, Ian, this story has broken over the weekend, so probably better give a little bit more context for people watching. So, while
yeah.
SVB's problems stem from its earlier investment decisions, the run on the bank was triggered on the 8th of March when the bank said it would have to raise an additional $1.75 billion in capital. It told investors it needed to plug a hole caused by the sale of its loss-making bond portfolio. Suddenly, everyone became alarmed that the bank was short of capital, says Fariborz Moshririan, who's a director of the Institute of Global Finance. Customers were now aware of the deep financial problems at the bank and started withdrawing money en masse. Unlike a retail bank that caters for businesses and households, SVP's clients tended to have much larger deposits. This meant that the bank run was swift. 2 days after it announced it would raise more capital, the formerly $200 billion company collapsed, making it the biggest bank collapse in the US since 2008. So, with that context and a little bit of explanation, Ian, do you think, and I appreciate we're very close to the events at the moment in time, but was this a
Mhm.
classic run on a bank as confidence collapsed? Perhaps only more so because of the nature of its customers who tended to hold larger sums in the accounts. So was this a simple classic run on a bank as confidence collapsed?
I don't think so. I think it was slightly different to that because this bank was actually, or is, very unusual in that it basically doesn't seem to offer much in the way of traditional banking. What it does is basically hold deposits, and it was holding about 6.7 billion of deposits in the UK for tech companies, and often these tech companies were riding high on a bubble in tech valuations. There was a huge surge in VC investment in the tech sector, and the pandemic fueled all that. The pandemic, which lasted from 2020 to 2022, was fueling a bubble in technology stocks. But what the bank was doing was it was basically inane. It was not, it was purely, it was like a one club golfer, and it was investing almost all the deposits that tech companies and VCs were depositing with it into long dated bonds. whether those be mortgage-backed securities or government bonds. Um, it was a very sort of myopic and short-sighted strategy, because as soon as the Fed and other central banks started raising interest rates, the value of those bonds started to fall, and the bank was immediately in trouble because it had placed money on deposit at a certain value, but the valuation of the bond, the underlying bonds that it was investing in, was suddenly falling because of what Jerome Powell, the head of the Fed, was doing, and what other central bankers, such as Mervyn King, were doing. So it is quite an unusual situation. It's not the only one. There's two other banks which have also failed in the last week. One's called Silvergate and one's called Signature. Silicon Valley Bank, with a total assets of 200 billion US dollars overall, was the biggest of these three. But there's three banks in the US which have got into the same problem. And it's basically incredibly bad management on the part of the board and the management team of the banks concerned.
That's great analysis. Thanks, Ian. That's very. I was confident you'd be able to help us understand what's going on. You retweeted a comment from Reuters earlier today saying that there is a massive moral hazard in backstopping all SVP depositors. This is a bailout and a major change in the way in which the US system was built and its incentives. If all bank deposits are now insured, why do you need banks? So this struck me as bringing us back in a way to 2008, or some of the discussions in 2008. So do you think does this collapse and the other two collapses you've been talking about, does that reopen concerns about whether banks, retail banks and banks with which the likes of you and I interact as customers, does this reopen concerns about whether those banks are businesses which can and should be at some level of risk, or on the other hand, should they be run as public utilities, given that we all depend on them?
I think the moral hazard is a massive issue, and if you have roughly £85,000 of deposits protected in the UK under the deposit, what's it called, the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, which was increased or doubled after Northern Rock in 2007, that should be it. Depositors ought to be more careful about where they place their funds. They should look at the competence of the management team of the bank that they are depositing their cash with, and not just willy-nilly deposit it with a bank without even bothering to look under the hood of that bank and see how well or badly managed that bank is. So I think the fact that there's been 100% rescue of depositors' cash by the Fed, by the federal authorities in the US, and in the UK by HSBC, does create a moral hazard, and it makes bankers think they can basically get away with being incompetent or corrupt or whatever, even criminal. So yeah, I definitely think the moral hazard is a massive issue. It's an issue which Mervyn King was personally concerned about ahead of the bailouts of 2008, but he was overridden by Alistair Darling and the UK Treasury, who went ahead with the 1.3 trillion bailout program that was instituted in the UK in 2008-9.
Absolutely. Ian, thank you. I knew that we would get some insight and some very useful analysis from you on this particular story this evening. So I'm extremely grateful to you for your thoughts. But let's move on now to our next item, because Gary Lineker is to return to presenting sport on the BBC after he was taken off air for criticising the language used by government ministers when discussing the government's asylum policy. Tim Davie, the Director General of the BBC, apologised on Monday for the widespread disruption to sports programming over the weekend and announced an independent review of the corporation's internal social media guidelines. Everyone recognises this has been a difficult period for staff, contributors, presenters, and most importantly, our audiences, said Davie. I apologise for this. The potential confusion caused by the grey areas of the BBC's social media guidance that was introduced in 2020 is recognised. I want to get matters resolved and our sport content back on air. Davie, who was responsible for introducing the tough social media guidelines for staff after government pressure, said it was difficult to balance the BBC's commitments to both impartiality and freedom of expression. The corporation's social media guidelines are meant to govern BBC staff and presenters who work in news and politics, not those in other areas such as sport. Also, of course, Gary Lineker works for the corporation in a freelance capacity. He's not staff. Impartiality is important to the BBC, said Davey. It is also important to the public. The BBC has a commitment to impartiality in its charter and a commitment to freedom of expression. That is a difficult balancing act to get right, where people are subject to different contracts and on-air positions, and with different audience and social media profiles. Davey announced a review of his social media policy to be led by an independent expert who will have a particular focus on how it applies to freelancers outside news and current affairs. Meanwhile, at Westminster, the UK government's migration bill, which prompted Gary Lineker's original tweets, is getting its second reading today. The SNP has urged a U-turn on what they call the UK government's inhumane and cruel migration bill. Alison Thulis MP, the SNP's Home Affairs spokesperson, has said it's not too late for the UK government to scrap the proposal, which, if passed, will deliver, she says, nothing but pain and misery to those fleeing war-torn countries or places where they face persecution. So, Ian, first of all, thinking of the narrow story, the Lineker aspect of this story, is this in fact is this story a very tiny storm in a very wee teacup? Does it much matter what the BBC does or says, let alone what football pundits do or say?
Well, I think it's indicative of a wider problem within the BBC, which has been provoked by the presence of people like Sir Robbie Gibb on its board, and by the presence of Richard Sharp, former Goldman Sachs banker and Conservative donor and facilitator of loans for Boris Johnson as its chairman, and also possibly with Tim Davey, who has been in the past a strong supporter of the Conservatives and stood as a councillor in Hammersmith and Fulham in, I think, the 90s. So I think there's been a gradual right-wing takeover of the BBC, and there was absolutely nothing wrong with what Gary Lineker tweeted. In my view, it was 100% accurate about the proposed asylum ban, which, various other international bodies, including the UNHCR and almost every human rights organization in the world, has seriously criticized. So for him as a freelance contributor to sports programs to tweet his personal thoughts on that, I think was entirely acceptable. The BBC should never have reacted in the way that it did. I think it reacted in the way that it did because it's terrified of losing its license fee system of funding, the charter, etc. And so it's in a sort of rather pernicious situation where, in order to try to avoid losing that position of being funded by the license fee, it is running scared of upsetting the Tory government of the day. And so I think that's why Tim Davey reacted like he did with the short-term ban on Gary Lineker appearing on Match of the Day. I mean, my overall view is that the BBC is in serious trouble as far as its UK political coverage is concerned, and I think it needs to reconsider its whole approach to that. And this is driven, as I said, by fear of losing its existing status.
Thanks, Ian. And as it happens, the BBC's political coverage is something that I'd like to talk to you about under the heading of our next item, because BBC Question Time presenter Fiona Bruce has said that she will step back from her role as an ambassador for the charity Refuge after claims that she had trivialised domestic violence during a discussion about Stanley Johnson during last week's programme. In a statement, Bruce apologised that survivors of domestic abuse had been distressed by her comments, which she said she had been legally obliged to make, but said they had been mischaracterised on social media. Bruce said, I have been a passionate advocate and campaigner for all survivors of domestic abuse and have used my privileged position as a woman in the public eye to bring this issue to the fore, notably in my work for over 25 years with Refuge. But following the events of last week, I have faced a social media storm, much of which mischaracterised what I said and took the form of personal abuse directed at me. This row arose following a discussion about Stanley Johnson being given a peerage by his son and ex-Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Thursday's programme. The panellist, Yasmin Alibhai-Brown, said that Stanley Johnson was a wife-beater on record. She was interrupted by Fiona Bruce, who said, "I'm not disputing what you're saying," and then countered that while it had been reported that Stanley Johnson had broken his wife's nose and she had ended up in hospital, Fiona Bruce then added, "Stanley Johnson has not commented on that. Friends of his said that it did happen. It was a one-off." Yes, but it did happen, Alibhai-Brown said. Refuge has said it has accepted Bruce's decision. However, it went on to say, Refuge's position was and remains clear. Domestic abuse is never a one-off. It is a pattern of behaviour that can manifest in a number of ways, including, but not limited to, physical abuse. Domestic abuse is never acceptable. So, thinking about this story and also in the context of the item we were talking about before with regard to Gary Lineker, do you think that do you think that first of all, do you think that the question time format really still works at the BBC in the context of what you were saying about where the BBC is itself with regard to its political coverage, with regard to the brutally polarised politics and culture wars which bedevil politics in the UK at the moment? And the format, does the format work, especially because Fiona Bruce has sought to blame the lawyers for what came out of her mouth?
Well, I think David Dimbleby was a better presenter, and previous presenters, including Robin Day, I'm old enough to remember Robin Day, were, somehow more magisterial and somehow seemed to be more politically neutral. But the impression I get with watching Question to Bruce is presenting it is that she's quite dismissive of alternative. She's often quite dismissive of alternative views, and she gives the impression of being more lenient and/or supportive of conservative or right-wing views. And I think this is a major issue for the program because, basically diminishes its credibility. So maybe if they were to find a new present, maybe she should step down not just from Refuge, but also from BBC Question Time, and then maybe they could find someone who is, who has more gravitas and who is more objective in the way they handle the debate. So I don't know who that person is, but I think that might be the solution here.
Thanks, Ian. That certainly was what was crossing my mind. It was strange that Gary Lineker was asked to step back, but Fiona Bruce was not, and instead had stepped back from the charity, from her charitable work with Refuge. But let's move on to our next item this evening, because ahead of the budget on Wednesday, the SNP has challenged the UK government to scrap the benefit cap and to uprate benefits in line with the cost of living. The party warned families are being left to languish in poverty under the UK government's restrictive welfare policies, creating an unnecessary burden on households, exacerbating the cost of living crisis. Recent analysis by the Child Poverty Action Group has revealed the fallacy of the benefit cap being a work incentive, finding more than half of those seeing their benefits restricted are exempt from having to find work due to a number of reasons, such as child-caring responsibilities. As a result, tens of thousands of households are seeing their benefits capped at a rate that doesn't meet rising costs, with energy bills, mortgage rates, and grocery inflation all soaring. Commenting, the SNP's social justice spokesperson, David Linden MP, said, "This budget comes at a time of real difficulty for families, made even worse by the unfair benefit cap and restrictively low benefits. The Tories must scrap the cap and uprate benefits to meet the cost of living." So, Ian, thinking about the politics of this, what do you think are the chances that Jeremy Hunt will scrap the benefit cap and or uprate social security in line with inflation?
I don't know, but I do think that he has got approximately 30 billion of headroom because of various factors, which I can come on to later when we discuss the budget. But whether or not he will use that money to remove the benefit cap, I just don't know. I mean, Tories have a reputation for being, for favouring austerity, for being uh, incredibly tough on less privileged households and people. So I wouldn't be holding up too much hope. I mean, I think it's presumably this social welfare is an entirely reserved matter. So therefore, there's nothing that the SNP can do other than plead with the Tory government to do what it wants in terms of raising the cap.
Thanks, Ian. And thinking about the politics and the economics of this as well. The last
Yes,
time we had a budget, and yes, it was a budget, and it certainly wasn't a mini budget, and that was all of
yes,
171 days ago.
yes.
Some people might say it all got a bit exciting. Well, not a bit exciting. It got very worrying. So I was wondering, what do you think, given the politics of the Tory party at the moment, do you think that there's a chance that Jeremy Hunt would secretly like to try the same stunt that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng tried in October in order to prove just how much of a Tory chancellor he really is?
No, I think he's a very different animal to Kwasi Kwarteng. Actually, I think that's been described as a wild attempt to dash for growth, a sort of lots of unfunded tax cuts, which would have obviously benefited the wealthy and large corporations. And I seriously don't think that Jeremy Hunt is in the same ideological mold as Kwarteng and Truss, which is good. That should be seen as a positive.
Well, certainly, if it doesn't frighten the markets to the same extent as happened in October, then that's likely to be a good thing. So, in broad terms, given the current politics, especially from the Tory government, where do you think that we'll see Jeremy Hunt driving this budget? Do you think we'll see
Well,
significant changes, or just tinkering around the edges until the economy stabilizes?
um, well, it could be seen as almost rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. You've got basically Hunt, who is quite a boring sort of managerial type of chancellor, who is looking to tinker around the edges, possibly to try and get more people back into work with certain extra subsidies for childcare for young families, potentially other approaches to try to get older people back into work. Because at the moment we have 1 million unfilled vacancies in the UK, and this is partly the result of Brexit, but it's also due to long-term sickness, which is perhaps an overhang from the COVID pandemic. And one of his priorities in this budget is to try to fill those vacancies and persuade British people to get back into jobs and into employment. And so I think we're going to see various uh, measures that will be introduced on Wednesday by Jeremy Hunt to address that issue. He's not going to increase immigration because that would not to allow increased immigration, because that would not please the hardline Brexiteers who still have a lot of clout within his party. In terms of other things, I mean, there was actually a very good article I thought by George Kerevan in the National, which looked at what's likely to be in the budget, and one of the things that George Kerevan said was, hang on, I've got the article here. It was, yeah, basically, 6 months on from that extraordinary period of October last year when Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss, nearly destroyed the UK economy with their unfunded tax cuts and their so-called mini budget. The economic picture is not quite as bad as it was. interest rates on public borrowing have come down, gas prices have fallen, um, which means that the cost of subsidizing people's energy bills, or helping people with their energy bills and businesses with their energy bills, is going to cost less than anticipated. There has also been a rebound in the global economy since last October, which has boosted the Treasury tax take. So, to some extent, Hunt is now in a much better position than he was when he first took over and when he unwound the Kwarteng policies. And so he does have, as I said, a certain amount of headroom to spend money on certain things. But the one thing that we probably need the most is something akin to what Joe Biden is implementing in the US, which is massive 400 billion worth of subsidies for the green economy and renewable energy and related green measures, which will help the US achieve net zero. And that is huge. That's a massive program of subsidizing the green economy, which will be hugely advantageous to the US in the long term. But unfortunately, I don't think Hunt has quite the same ability or vision. So that sort of thing is not going to happen. Certainly not in the budget on Wednesday.
Thanks, Ian. That's some great insight and some great analysis, as you say, in particular, comparing with the approach that Joe Biden is taking in the US at the moment. And as it happens, our next item also takes us to the US. In a case that starkly illustrates the deadly consequences of the permissive gun culture in the US and the effect it has on the country's youth, a 3-year-old girl accidentally shot and killed her 4-year-old sister in their Texas home late yesterday, according to authorities. First responders found the girl dead while responding to an emergency call at 7:30 p.m. local time about an injured minor at an apartment in suburban Houston, the local sheriff's office said in a statement. She was there with 5 adults, including her mother and stepfather, when her younger sister grabbed a loaded semi-automatic pistol and shot her. The adults all believed at least one of the others was watching the girls, but no one was supervising them when they were in the bedroom, the sheriff of Harris County, Ed Gonzalez, told reporters. The girl was pronounced dead at the scene, and it was not immediately clear whether any of the adults would face criminal charges for failing to make sure that the gun used in the shooting was inaccessible to the children. Neither the dead 4-year-old girl, her sister, or any of the family members have been publicly identified. Gun violence and accidents in recent years has become the leading cause of death for children in the US, surpassing car crashes, injuries for other reasons, and congenital diseases. The research and policy non-profit organisation Every Town for Gun Safety estimate that 19,000 children and teens are shot and killed or wounded annually in the US. While deadly school shootings like the one that killed 19 students and 2 teachers in Uvalde, Texas last year command the most news headlines, the vast majority of child and teen gun killings, intentional and unintentional, occur in their homes, according to Every Town for Gun Safety. Now, it also bears repeating, today is the 27th anniversary of the murder of 16 bairns and their teacher in Dunblane in 1996. Our thoughts, of course, remain with the families of all of those who were affected on that cold and snowy day. But Ian, from time to time, those on the lunatic fringe, those who set national political policy, and I'm looking at you, Nigel Farage, and you, Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson, they call for the ban on handguns, which was introduced in the UK as a reaction to the outrage at Dunblane. They call for that ban to be scrapped. Do you sense that there is any public clamour for the ban on handguns in the UK to be scrapped?
I haven't noticed that. No. I, as you say, it's probably more of a lunatic fringe type idea. Um, Prior to Dunblane, what was the situation with handguns prior to Dunblane? Could anyone just buy one or have one in the UK? Or
There was a licensing regime, as there is now for shotguns, but
okay, so it's
you
the same as for
obtain a
shot.
handgun license.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think it would be utterly insane for any UK government to propose the removal of that ban on handguns. 19,000 was the figure you said, I think, of children who were shot each year in America. Under the age of what, 17? I can't remember. 19,000 children and teens shot and killed and wounded annually in the USA. I mean, that is an unbelievable figure. And this story of a 3-year-old girl shooting her 4-year-old sister is just appalling. I mean, I just can't really imagine what it must be like for the rest of the family, or for their friends or their relations, or even for she grows up thinking that she murdered her own sister when she was a 3-year-old. No, I mean, in general, I sincerely hope that the idea that handguns should be permitted again should not gain any traction in the UK.
Thanks, Ian. As you say, a desperately sad story from Houston. We'll move
Yes.
on to our next item now this evening, because over 50 million free bus journeys have been made since the Scottish Government introduced free bus travel for under 22s over a year ago. The Scottish Government's concessionary bus travel schemes are the most generous in the UK, with over 2 million people across Scotland now eligible for free bus travel. Everyone in Scotland under the age of 22, everyone over the age of 60, and disabled people and their companions can benefit from free bus travel. To mark this milestone, the Minister for Transport, Jenny Gilruth, and Minister for Zero Carbon Buildings, Active Travel and Tenants' Rights, Patrick Harvey, will attend the Sighthill campus of Edinburgh College to hear the experiences of young people benefiting from the scheme. Bernardo Scotland also joined to explain how they are promoting the benefits of the scheme to young people that they support, and to ensure that as many people as possible, regardless of background, can access the scheme. The Minister for Transport, Jenny Gilruth, said, "It is really encouraging that 50 million free bus journeys have now been made by under 22s across Scotland. This policy is a game changer for our young people, and I'm looking forward to hearing about how free bus travel is giving them more independence, confidence, and flexibility in how they access services, including educational opportunities at Edinburgh College." Edinburgh in particular enjoys a high uptake, with over 71,000 young people, equating to slightly more than 89% of those eligible, registered for free bus travel. So, Ian, firstly, I don't yet qualify for free bus passes, so I won't comment, but I think that you might do. And of course, we both have family who qualify for the under 22 scheme. Martin Crew, who's the director of Bernardo Scotland, said that the scheme had created a wealth of new opportunities for young people to access education, work, training, and leisure activities, with more young people using bus services as a result. Do you think is Martin Crew's analysis of the situation and the scheme is he right?
Yes, I think Martin Cruz is correct with that analysis. Um, I mean, presumably the scheme works that when a young person or someone aged over 60 uses a bus, such as Lothian buses in Edinburgh or First Group or whatever it is, it could be CityLink in Glasgow and Edinburgh, the government presumably pays the bus company for the equivalent for the fare that person would otherwise have paid. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, okay. So I don't know what the annual cost is, but generally I approve of this. I think, young people are obviously struggling financially, perhaps even more than others, more middle-aged or older people who may have more resources or earning capacity. So I think it's great that the young people aged under 22 can benefit from free bus travel. Um, One thing I was going to say was that there's a lot of kind of hardline unionist stroke right wing commentators in Scotland who always whinge whenever they see that someone earning over 42,000 is paying an extra 700 quid or extra 400 quid a year in tax, whatever it is, because of the differential in income tax between the rest of the UK and Scotland. Um, I can think of certain names, but I won't name them. Some of them are friends. Some one or two of them are actually friends of mine. But so you hear this constant bleating about higher taxes and how dreadful it is that we're paying X £100 more a year if you're earning over a certain threshold of 42,000 or whatever it is. But what those people often seem to ignore is there are benefits which are perhaps as compensating or even outweighing the extra tax, including free tuition fees for anyone who wants to go to university whose parents live in Scotland or is a Scottish taxpayer, including free prescriptions, including free eye tests, and including the bus travel that we're talking about. So I think these sorts of measures seem to get ignored sometimes by the people who are Scottish independents.
Thanks, Ian. That very much puts this policy into the context of other policies, and including taxation policy in Scotland. Thank you. We'll move on to our final item this evening, though, because it also focuses on young people, because kinship carers are being urged to check if they could be entitled to the Scottish Child Payment after eligibility was expanded to include more of them last year. The call comes at the start of Scottish Kinship Care Week, which celebrates the role of extended family or friends who care for children when they cannot remain with their birth parents. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, met with a group of kinship carers this morning at an annual Big Breakfast hosted by the Big Hearts Community Trust at Tynecastle Park in Edinburgh to thank them and to highlight the extra support available via the Scottish Child Payment and other Scottish social security benefits. The Big Hearts Kinship Care Programme was launched in 2015 and offers a range of support for young people and their carers, including after-school clubs, coffee mornings and well-being advice. The First Minister said, "We owe kinship carers an enormous debt of gratitude for the role they play in providing loving and secure homes for children and young people, and it's vital they receive every penny of support they're entitled to." She went on, "In line with our commitment to tackling child poverty, we increased the Scottish Child Payment to £25 a week per eligible child last year and expanded the eligibility criteria to include more kinship carers. We want to ensure everyone gets the financial support they're entitled to, so I'd encourage carers to check whether they're entitled to receive the Scottish Child Payment and any other Scottish Government benefits." Now, by kinship carers, what we mean are grandparents, great-grandparents, uncles, aunts, siblings, other relatives or family friends who step in to take care of a child who is unable to live with their parents. Kinship carers provide love and security for children who would otherwise not be cared for within their families. So, Ian, do you think, is this another example of how the provision of social security and other benefits, and in particular financial support for young people and those caring for them, is diverging in Scotland from the approach taken in other nations in the UK?
It does. It does seem to be that is the case. Yes. I mean, is this program originally funded by not by the Scottish government, but by Big Hearts, which is funded by various charities and charitable funds, or is this being funded by the Scottish government? I'm not quite clear on that.
Uh, so the celebration of kinship care was being promoted by the Scottish Government today in the context of making sure that everybody who's eligible for the Scottish Child Payment has applied for it. I
Okay,
think Big Hearts Community Trust operates with a range of financial supports, both charitable and others.
and National Lottery Endowment Fund, I think.
Yes,
Um,
yes,
I think
yeah,
yes, we £5 a week for each eligible child. I think. I mean,
that's
to
right.
be honest with you, I'm not really an expert on this program, but it does seem good, and I think uh, does it include middle-aged people looking after very old parents, for example, or is it purely for, say, aunts and uncles, or um, sorry, can you clarify how the scheme actually how
Yes,
it's related?
so kinship care relates to the care of children by other family members.
Yes, okay. Well, overall, I think it's great. I'm certainly a supporter.
All
But
right.
as I said, I'm not, I'm not really an expert on this, and I haven't got sufficient knowledge to really have a firm view.
No, no problem, Ian. Ian, thank you. The point is that the Scottish child payment of £25 per week per eligible child, its
Yes.
scope was expanded last year to include more families who provide kinship care to children. But I suspect that we will hear more with regard to kinship care and also the Scottish child payment as this year continues. But thanks, Ian,
Okay.
and thank you for your thoughts.
So it's really about expanding the eligibility criteria for the £25 a week uh,
That's
Scottish
correct.
child payment. Yes. Okay. Well, I think
That's it. That's it.
that's a, sorry not to be more
Thanks, Ian.
knowledgeable on that one.
No, no, not at all. Not at all. Now, usually towards the end of our programs on Broadcasting Scotland, I have the chance to blether some words about something that happened on this day in history. However, last night, All Quiet on the Western Front won 4 Oscars, picking up the trophies for international feature, cinematography, original score, and production design. The screenplay was adapted by a filmmaker, author, and 5 times world champion triathlete Leslie Patterson, who was born and brought up in Stirling. She first read the novel at school in Stirling and was struck by the theme of the betrayal of youth. She said in an interview recently, "I think that appealed to me because I really am very Scottish, and I've been brought up with the idea that we're the underdogs fighting against power." So, as a special treat, I've been given the chance to have a very quick look at other notable Scottish contributions to the Oscars. In 2007, Tilda Swinton took home the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress for her role in Michael Clayton. Now, while she was born in London, she went to school in Edinburgh, she lived and worked here, and of course, she now lives in Nairn. In 2003, Annie Lennox scored an Oscar for Best Song for Into the West, which is from Return of the King, the final part of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. He may be better known now for his roles in Doctor Who in the thick of it, but Peter Capaldi won the Oscar for Best Live Action Short Film almost 30 years ago in 1995 for Franz Kafka's It's a Wonderful Life. Born in Hillhead in Glasgow and brought up in Helensburgh, Deborah Kerr moved to Hollywood in the 40s and became one of the most celebrated actresses. She was nominated 6 times for Academy Awards, but she was finally given her chance on the podium when she was presented with an honorary Academy Award in 1994. The Glasgow filmmaker Ken MacDonald may have been snubbed by the Academy for his film Last King of Scotland, which won Forrest Whitaker the Best Actor award, but he did pick up an Oscar for Best Documentary in 1990 for One Day in September. Now, of course, in 1987, Sean Connery won Best Supporting Actor for Brian De Palma's crime drama The Untouchables. Sir Sean played the Irish-American cop Jim Malone, complete with Sir Sean's customary accent. In 2003, he was further awarded for this role when Empire magazine readers voted it the worst movie accent of all time. Although maybe Sir Sean should have been respected for the fact that no matter if he was playing a Russian submarine captain, an English king, or an Irish-American cop, he always sounded like he's in and around Tollcross and Dalry in Edinburgh. In 1960, the Perthshire-born screenwriter Neil Patterson won an Oscar for the script of Room at the Top. It was one of the few trophies not won by Ben-Hur that year. Mr. Patterson stayed in Scotland during the awards ceremony and was told in a dawn phone call that he'd won, but he didn't think to mention it to his family over breakfast. And in 1936, Frank Lloyd's best-known film, Mutiny on the Bounty, that's the one with Charles Laughton and Clark Gable, won Best Picture. Mr. Lloyd was one of the founders of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. He was born in Glasgow in 1887. He went to Canada at the age of 23 to work as an engineer and reached Hollywood in 1913. He was eventually chair of the Academy between 1934 and 1935. So I'm glad to have had the chance to give a quick canter backwards in time through Scottish successes at the Oscars. Ian, are there any particular favourite films in that list for you, or any Scottish connections with the Oscars that I've missed?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I think my biggest surprise about these Oscars was that The Banshees of Inisherin, which I thought was a superb film, was nominated for 9 Oscars, but came home empty-handed, and that must have been a huge disappointment for the team who made that film. I have to confess, I haven't actually seen All Quiet on the Western Front yet, but it is a fantastic coup for Leslie Patterson, who is a triathlete, but who's kind of moved into screenwriting, I think, which seems quite an unusual career progression. But it's what she did, I gather. Yeah. So overall, Scotland hasn't done too badly, and probably overall Scotland's punched above its weight. But it probably could do with a stronger film industry. And one of the things that Sean Connery was trying to do prior to his death was to establish a studio, film studios in Scotland. And I don't know whether that plan is going to go ahead now.
I think there are schemes. Obviously, there's now a large studio at Cumbernauld, and a studio is under construction in Leith, I think. But yes, as you say, Sir Sean was a great supporter, going back to the Scottish the proceeds from Diamonds Are Forever, all of which were handed to charity for endowment for young people and for a studio in Scotland. But Ian, thank you for your Ian, thank you for your thoughts on that. I'm very grateful, but I'm afraid that is all that we have time for this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes, to continue to develop the station, and to make new programmes for you. Our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 per month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of raising £30,000 to enable us to continue to pay the bills. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment as a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, thank you very much. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, or in any other way that helps our work, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot. Please like and retweet us there. And you can also find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. When you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. Please click on the wee bell. We will be back tomorrow evening at 7 for the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please come back and join us then. I'd like to thank everyone who has been watching, and of course I'd like to say a very special thanks to our very special guest, Ian Fraser. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you for having me.
It's been an absolute pleasure, thank you. Please, everyone, keep safe and warm, and I hope that you have a very peaceful evening. Bye-bye.